great PMs, everybody loves them on the team because they just make everybody's life easier and they take work off your plate that you don't want to do.
Mm.
So designer that is very product strategic vision thinking person. If they're working with a bad PM, they're gonna have a really bad time because like, get out of my way. Just like I know what we need to do. But if they're an awesome PM, the PM will give them space to think about the solution, ideate, give them all the information they need, uh, make sure engineers are building the things they wanted them to build, those kinds of things. So that's kind of a rough way to think about it. And basically, if your designer is frustrated, you don't have a great PM.
The main reason why I wanted to chat with you is something I've come to the sudden and concerning recognition that I don't know what product means,
Hmm.
and I'm I thought I knew what it means, and the deeper I dig into what product as a function is and is responsible for, the less clear it is to me. Um, so I guess I'll open with just asking you what product means, and then I can go into some of my more specific questions.
Sweet. And then, so when you say product, are you thinking like the role of product management? Or are you thinking broader, like a product team or just like getting good at product?
I think I would say product management is probably what I would start with.
Uh
Um,
huh.
the the specifics of where I'm confused is I ask people what a product manager does, and when they describe
Classic.
it, yeah, and then they describe certain functions, and then I say, "Oh, okay, so then you're responsible for this," and they say, "Well, no, that's actually a product designer." I'm like, "Oh, okay, so then what you'd actually do is this." Like, "Well, no, that's more of a
Yeah.
project manager." And I end up in that it's like that scene from Office Space of like, "So
Yep.
what is it that you do here exactly?"
I'm a people person,
Yeah.
which is not so far from it. Yeah. Got it. Okay, cool. So, yeah, one of my favorite interview questions for product managers is what is product management? And something you learn is everyone has a different definition. So let me kind of share how I think about it. And that's something a lot of companies ask. And we could talk about actually Airbnb's experience on this because they had questions around this too. So, so the first thing I'll say is uh, there's nothing like specifically unique about a product manager and the things they know and the things they do that nobody else can do. A lot of a lot of the value a product manager brings is they have time to do the things that somebody has to do, and they've done these things for a long time, so they're really good at it. So there's these like sets of activities that somebody has to do. A lot of times these activities get spread across design and engineering and the CEO and other functions. And a lot of times companies don't need a PM for a long time because those folks are doing those things and it's going great. So it doesn't you don't always need a product manager, and there's nothing like magical about the things that PM do. But they have time to do these things that have to be done. So what are the things that have to be done? A really simple way that I've kind of thought about it that is kind of memorable is there's kind of like these three jobs to a product manager. Uh, their job is to shape the product, ship the product, and sync the people, and all of that in order to drive business impact. So, unpacking those a little bit, shaping the product basically means so somebody has to do these things. Somebody has to take insights from customers, stakeholders, data, and use that to identify and prioritize and build the things that you need to build to make your product successful. So somebody needs to do that. Uh, shipping the product, somebody needs to make sure that people are hitting deadlines. Everyone's got a sense of when things should ship, when customers should expect things, and that um, that things are coming out that are awesome. And then the third bucket is synchronize the people, which is just make sure everyone in the company, or if they're just all like focused on a team, everyone on the team is aligned on a vision, a strategy, a goal, roadmap, priorities, all these things, so that you're not wasting a lot of time. Uh, and then all of that to make sure that the team is always working on the highest ROI stuff that will drive the most impact. So those are the three buckets. Somebody has to do these things. Sometimes designers can do them, sometimes engineers, but that's basically what a PM does, those three things. So I'll pause there and
Yeah.
see where we can go.
Yeah. One of the functions that we have, I'm not really sure this is a function as much as it is a designation. Um, it's the concept of a directly responsible
Mhm,
individual. Like
mhm,
they are the person responsible for delivering an outcome for a project. And I'd say roughly half of the conversations I have with PMs, it just is that same definition.
uh-huh.
Is that accurate or potentially accurate?
So at Airbnb, we had DRIs, we had GMs, and then we had PMs.
Mm,
Oftentimes, PMs are just really good DRIs. They're just like naturally the DRI of a team, but it doesn't have to be. At Airbnb, we had designers uh, that were also often responsible for an initiative. At Airbnb, we kind of moved to like DRI and GM, kind of meaning the same thing eventually, because the idea of a GM is basically they manage every function within an org. So they're like they manage the product manager, the designer, engineer, things like that. So I guess the simple answer to your question, they're not the same thing, and we can talk about why. But a PM is most often a natural DRI because they're kind of here's a metaphor I like to use. PMs are kind of like the captain of the team. So if you think about like basketball teams and soccer teams, there's like a team captain when it's just like they're all the same, they're all players on the team, but one player has this kind of like unique designation that the teams have decided they're the captain and we're going to kind of look to them to guide us a little bit. And so PM is kind of that on a team. And so they're kind of like a natural leader and the de facto leader. And oftentimes DRIs lead to that. But uh but but DRI is just like they're on the hook for making this thing happen. It doesn't mean they're great at all of these things that a PM should be doing.
hmm. Can
Um,
you elaborate a little bit on why? So it sounds like you had three definitions, which sort of collapse down into two. Why don't they just collapse down into one? What's the designation there?
Between DRI and product manager. So one like simple difference is sometimes not everything is product. And so if you have like an ops program or something like that, you don't need like a product manager responsible for that. Sometimes you could just have like a head of ops that's a DRI for something. So it's just like a really simple difference. Um like like by definition a DRI, like all you're saying is they're responsible for this whole thing. It doesn't mean they're going to be good at building product. That's kind of like a simple way to think about the difference there.
Hmm. Is it
And that's also not like a function, right? You're not gonna we're hiring DRIs. So usually you pick one of the existing skill sets and functions to be a DRI. And I guess what I'm saying is PMs are just like really good at that often because they're naturally a DRI for a team.
hmm. Yeah, I wonder. So let's take the distinction between a DRI and a PM.
Mhm.
This is just something that we've been trying to suss out internally. Is um, the what are the things that distinguish the two, other than saying like some sort of what feels like an ambiguous understanding of like, and they're a DRI, but they're also good at product.
Mhm.
Um, which it's somewhat circular in that regard. So, like, is that they're good at product design? Is it that they're good at making business trade offs? Is it that they have intuition around complexity and resourcing? Like, what does that? What does it entail?
Like the product component of product management slash GRI. Got it. So like what are the skill sets of like PMs outside of the project management component, which is just coordinating and timelines and things like that? Uh it's kind of a vague, like, art more than science kind of thing, but, there's kind of this bucket of skill called product sense, which, one way to describe it is just, like, you're more often right about product changes and how the impact they'll make, whether something's gonna work out or not. So there's this kinda just, like, sense that you build over time, the more you build product, that product managers that are great end up being really good at. Um Then there's just like the skill of working with product functions, I'd say, just like experience working with engineers and knowing what's important to them and knowing how to communicate and motivate engineers. And then same with designers. So that's kind of like a unique to product management skill. Um, yeah. There's like other I'm trying to think of like the slice of skills that are outside of the stuff you're talking about. Those are probably the two big ones.
Well,
Um,
if we
yeah.
take that second one, it doesn't
Mhm,
feel particular. That feels like it feels relevant to anyone in a leadership role. It's
mhm.
motivate and coordinate people. If you're running the support team, you have to be able to do that, right?
Just maybe zooming out, is the question you're trying to get to is like, do you need product managers? And in that world of not needing product managers, can you make a head of design or engineer the DRI? Is that kind of what you're trying to do?
Well, we run some experiments in trying to, as you would expect, we're trying to experiment with org design and figure out what the best way of operating when you have an unusual culture like we have of fully remote and asynchronous.
Mhm,
And so we tried things like putting somebody with no product experience at all as the DRI for a product initiative.
mhm,
Just kind of see what happens. And
mhm,
um, there there are, following along on some of these projects. We've done this several times now. There are clearly gaps in the the functioning of that project, but they feel so ambiguous. And when we try to drill down into it, when we find one specific thing, it always feels like that thing can just very easily be taught. It's like, oh, they just need to know how to translate designs into tickets.
mhm.
Like, that's not that hard. Like, they should just do that. And a lot of the PMs that I talk to are like, no, 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 product, it can't be taught. It's like a magical thing that
What? Who are these
requires
PMs? Who are these PMs
it's
you're
a
talking to?
lot of them. Like
Can
they,
definitely be taught.
yeah. And it's when we get down into the specifics of what the gaps are, they all seem very achievable and surmountable by people with just better training. So
Right.
um, that's where I'm struggling.
I see. Like, basically what you're doing is you're teaching someone to be a product manager that's like a new to product manager without calling them PM. And so, yeah, uh, they will struggle, absolutely, and the things they'll struggle with mostly is, uh so something you need the PM to be really good at is just continuing to refocus the team on what is the highest impact work we can be doing, ruthlessly prioritizing and bringing people back to the problem that you're solving over and over and over and over so that design errors are pushing in the right direction, so that you're moving, like, you're focusing on metrics you're trying to move versus just like making beautiful product that feels good. So those are things that PMs are really good at, and over time you learn to get good at that and how important that is. Somebody that hasn't had experience in that and is put in that role is gonna forget about those things and drop those things. Uh, I don't know, I'm just like jumping to all the things that are probably happening that you're trying to fix. Uh, Another is just keeping people like on time and motivated without pushing them too hard and causing morale issues, and also setting clear expectations. There's all these, yeah, it's all these like soft and fuzzy warm things that PMs learn over time. I totally agree. Anyone can learn these things. Like, not everyone, but most people. Uh, and the benefit of having a PM is they've done these things again and again, and you don't have to teach them. But yeah, I don't think there's anything magical really, unless you want to be like a Steve Jobsian visionary product thinker. You don't need that for most PMs.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess the one of the things that does seem maybe the hardest to teach is the idea of product intuition,
Hmm.
which is understanding how to make trade-offs and how to change scope for things. Like I've been in the software world for long enough to know when somebody proposes something, they're like, "Hey, we want to do this. It's going to be 6 weeks." I can look at that and say, "Why don't you just do it this way, and it'll take 3 hours?" And I've done this enough times to know how to make those trade-offs.
Hmm.
I could see that as something that's hard to teach, only because it comes from years of experience and scar tissue from mistakes made in the past. But it seems like for most things, when there's a reasonably well defined project, um, I guess I would ask how much of what you think of as the work of a PM is is primarily project management and coordination.
The more junior they are, the more of their job is just like execute, ship on time, keep people aligned, and it's less big vision strategy, like incredible insights into product direction. But the more senior you get, the more you like manage other teams and other PMs, more and more of your time goes into that. So imagine at your it like the need that you have, that's not going to be a big need part in big part because you're there and your team's there, and you don't want to, as a founder, to feel like you're just like this new random PM that joined is just telling you what to build. It's like it rarely works out that way, and it's not good for the company. And it's often actually why a lot of PMs at early stage startups struggle because they're just stuck between the founder having a strong opinion and the team just that has to build it. So so they don't need a ton of that, in my opinion, early on, unless the founders are not that product uh, focused. But clearly, you guys are. So going back to your original question, I think a lot of it is project management and just coordinating and aligning. But that's a sucky job for a lot of people, and so it's a tricky role to be like a new PM at a small company. So you have to kind of set those expectations and then start to build trust so that they can take on more and more of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wonder, in the context of a product org, relative, say, an engineering org, um, I assume you would put um, designers and PMs within the product org. Is that right?
It depends. You can do it in all kinds of ways. Uh, you could have designers that have a head of design report up to you, and then a head of product and a head of engineering. And there's three functions. A lot of times, design rolls up to the head of product. It works in many ways. I don't know if there's a right way to do it. I think it probably depends on how important design is to your experience and whether like this should be a high top level function or not.
Hmm. And when you think of design, what does that mean to you in relation to product?
There's a lot of overlap. Uh, there's a at Airbnb actually at the beginning, Brian was actually in a similar place you're in, where he didn't understand why you need product managers because he went through design school, and what they teach you in design school is your job is to solve problems, identify opportunities, solve problems, ship the thing. He's like, "What? That's what we're doing. Why do we need product managers?" And it took a while. It took a while for him to see the value, and but eventually they came around, and there's like hundreds of product managers now at Airbnb. So so the core Venn diagram overlap is designers are trained to solve problems and figure out creative solutions. Um, so depending on the kind of designer you have at your company, you can sometimes just like sort somewhat divvy up responsibility where product is responsible for defining the problem and making sure everyone agrees. And this is like you can make it 80-20 and then 80-20 in the other way. So 80% PM responsible for defining the problem and aligning everyone behind a strategy. And then the designer, 80% is responsible for coming up with a solution. And then 20% everyone else contributes and has their say. That's a simple way of approaching it. My experience, great PMs, everybody loves them to on the team because they just make everybody's life easier and they take work off your plate that you don't want to do.
Mm.
So designer that is very product strategic vision thinking person. If they're working with a bad PM, they're gonna have a really bad time because like get out of my way. Just like I know what we need to do. But if they're an awesome PM, the PM will give them space to think about the solution, ideate, give them all the information they need, uh, make sure engineers are building the things they wanted them to build, those kinds of things. So that's kind of a rough way to think about it. And basically, if your designer is frustrated, you don't have a great PM.
Yeah, it's interesting because part of the part of the function of a DRI is to uh, make sure people are sufficiently resourced to be able to get their jobs done and to reduce friction and make it really easy for people to do work. So you're just picking up slack. You're making sure everyone's on the same page, working on things. It's interesting. My experiences as an engineer, and this is my first non-engineering role, and it has certainly been my experience at many of the projects that I've worked on, and a lot of other engineers that I know, that I have an aversion and maybe some scar tissue from product, I get this, I feel this ominous cloud of like process and Jira and like
Yeah.
arbitrary documentation and it's like ticket grooming and all these words that just like they trigger me in a very negative way. So I don't,
Yeah, I
I
get
think
that.
that
I get that.
what's that?
I get that. A lot of people have that trauma from from product managers. And actually, Joe at Airbnb, the other co-founder, he actually, for a long time, he was very resistant to process and avoided any kind of like product development process. And I think it really hurt the company early on because there was just like a lot of random shit happening and a lot of disorganization. So, so the question is not like should there be process? It's just what is a process that you're happy with that doesn't trigger you.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I would love to know if you have any insight into what was it that changed Brian's mind going from no PMs to hundreds of PMs?
I th- I was there like on the I was like adjacent to that happening, so I wasn't like in the meetings. Uh, but I think it was basically one seeing the impact that the specific PMs that we hired had on the team. Like they led really important projects and led them super well, communicated really well to Brian, kept everyone on track, made it clear it was happening and got things out. So it's just like you show through impact. Look what this person has done and imagine them not being here. That I think that was the core of it. Two is I think like, I don't know who you're making these DRIs. Sounds like there's just like a junior person who's just doing the DRI job. But if you're doing like
Some of them are quite senior. It depends on the
and are
project.
they do they have like another job too? Like is it a designer also DRI or is it just DRI?
Occasionally, the engineer responsible for it is the DRI. Sometimes it's somebody that I guess you would put as like a GM type person,
Got it.
the head of some functional area. It's their main project. Um,
Got it. Okay.
yeah,
So like in some sense, maybe they are just a PM with a different title. In another sense, another thing that triggers you to hire product managers is these like side things become a full-time job of just staying on top of everything. Like if it's an engineer, for example, and they just be start to hate life because they're in meetings all day, coordinating, checking in on timelines, reviewing the roadmap. And so that's another I imagine that's part of why Brian kind of realized like, okay, these designers in theory could do this, but they won't have any time for designing. They're gonna be in meetings all day. So I think that was probably part of it. But I think the core of it is just showing the impact that awesome PMs can have. And again, like a great PM makes everybody better. They're kind of like a lever to help the rest of the team perform if you have a good one. So that's how it should work.
yeah. Because I wonder with a lot of these things because I've always perceived product managers to be a pretty senior and important role, and oftentimes when I look at what PMs do, they seem like they're basically admins. Like a lot of what the time is spent on is as admin work. This is not meant in like a derogatory way.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just like,
There's a lot of that. There's a lot of that. Like taking
yeah,
notes, like
yeah,
scheduling meetings, road mapping. I think so there's like a deceiving piece to that in that most like the thing that everyone works on, like you're in control of what the team is doing by managing the roadmap. It's kind of like you're paving the road everyone's going down. So a lot of times it may feel very trivial, but basically they're guiding the entire team and possibly the entire company doing these very seemingly simple things. So there's like a deceiving power to that. Also, a lot of the job is those things. The thing you probably aren't seeing is they're like thinking about strategy and starting to define and craft the strategy of the team, which again is like the thing that determines what everyone's going to be working on. And it may seem like admin but it's a it's like the stuff you do
yeah.
and determines
Well,
what everyone's going to be doing.
yeah. I mean, where I'm going with that is it it seems weird to me. I think that people should be working on the thing that is the highest and best use of their time. And so if you're an amazing product designer and you're spending half your time taking notes and
Yeah,
being like team therapist,
right,
that's probably not the best use of your time. And
right.
so, but it seems like a lot of this comes down to the original question of like, so what does a PM do? It's like, well, we do these things. It's like, okay, so you do these things. Like, well, actually, that's the project manager or the technical program manager or the. It's like each of these things seems to be carved out for a different person. I'm just trying to understand the Venn diagram there.
So those two functions you don't need until you're like a big company like Microsoft or whatever. Um, a PM just like project management is within the role of a product manager. So you definitely don't need both for a long time. Um, and then these other things you definitely don't need for a long time. So so the PM role contains a bunch of stuff. It's like this, I don't know, another way people describe it, you're kind of like the glue that gets everything working. And um and so there's a lot to it, but it does fold in a lot of stuff that other people don't really like to do. Yeah. Yeah. It is a weird role. That's why everyone has a different definition. Also, different companies expect different things from the role, so that adds to the confusion. But but yeah, like the thing that a lot of companies didn't hire like I think about Stripe, they didn't have a PM until they had like 200 employees, and Snapchat didn't have a PM until they had 200 employees. So
Yep.
it's definitely like doable. I think it. I think you have to be in a specific place, like with Stripe. It has, they're like an API company,
Right.
so you don't need as much brain power on the user facing product. And then
Sure.
Like Snap, I don't, from what I hear, wasn't run very well. Like it's kind of like a shit show to work there.
Mm,
And so looking at that stat, it's not like, here's what
sure.
you should do. I don't think
Yeah.
that was the right move. And then their designers
Yeah.
were kind of product managers. So,
Right.
so it is doable. But I think the thing to think about is just there are these things to do. Who's the best person to do this thing? It could be this, one of these DRIs that you're picking, but it could just be like an awesome PM that you hire that has done this a long time.
Yep. Yeah. One of the experiments that we're running, we're probably going to run a few more of these. Is we have several people on our team with deep product experience, and um, the analogy that I would give is when you do pair programming, you always have the person who's being paired with as the driver on the keyboard instead of just having the senior person doing the typing and then maybe occasionally out loud saying something. You need the person who is being paired with to be the driver so that necessarily all of the necessary information gets transmitted to that person to do it effectively. And so we're
Mhm.
we're we're trying an experiment now of not allowing anyone on the product team to be responsible for any product related things, just to try to surface they're more like an advisor on the product things, and they're giving input, they're helping people come to the right decisions, but my hope is that I can understand a little bit better what are the things that product solves for that isn't that missing Venn diagram overlap that I don't currently see.
And then what do you do with that once you have that?
Um, my hope is that we'll end up with a list of something like 15 core competencies, and we can find ways of, uh, I don't know if it's like an internal training course or something to be able to level people up. Um, maybe one of my assumptions is that we're a consumer software product, and I think that it is important for people on our team to have some baseline product knowledge. And it's like the difference between zero product knowledge and table stakes is night and day in terms of how you think about approaching
Mhm.
problems.
Mhm.
So my hope is that we'll be in a position where we have a more, I don't know if it generalizable is the right word, but maybe a generalist skill set on the team that understands the core problems that we seek to solve and potentially focus more effort. This is what I meant by it feels weird to me that PMs, which are very capable, generally quite senior people, are spending so much of their time doing what feels like admin work, like the
Yeah, but
taking,
it's because yeah, yeah.
yeah,
But it's because that's the stuff that most contributes to the team success. Um, unblocking, engineers,
Yep.
making sure everyone's clear on exactly what's happening. Like it looks trivial, but that's the stuff that you need somebody to be on top of that
Yep.
causes these problems, like people being misaligned, spending time on the wrong thing.
Yep.
But I get what you're saying. There's a lot of menial work, and ideally, you can have less senior people doing that kind of stuff.
Yep.
What I find is that you need all of that context to do the bigger stuff, like
Yep.
pick, prioritize, make sure no one's forgetting something. There's not like a loose thread that hasn't been
Yep.
closed. Those kinds of things. But I like your first principles thinking here. I feel like there's like a trauma of having that product manager.
Yeah, probably.
And I I fear you're gonna go around this and then come back to, oh, we should just hire an awesome product manager that I love.
Yeah.
But it's cool to experiment with other approaches. I respect
Yeah.
that.
It's probably true. I mean, that is what has happened on a lot of the hires that we made. But when it happens, we at least know why we're hiring that person and what we're hiring them for.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
like it,
that makes
it took
sense.
us probably we hired an inside counsel much earlier than I think an average startup does, and I think he was hire number 25 to 30, somewhere in that
Mm.
range. And I fought it for a long time because like the outside counsel is a very normal thing, and you don't need someone on your team to do that. And then I just started keeping a list of all of the things that we needed someone to do. And at a certain point, I was like, we definitely need an inside counsel. Like this is ridiculous that we have
Mhm.
all of these things and these external firms are charging us so much money, and they no matter how many times we explain to them what it is we do as a company, they never figure it out. It's like we start from ground zero on every conversation. So, and it was like we should have done it 12 months earlier than we did. But um, if we had hired that person without really understanding the pain that we felt, I think it would not have gone nearly as well as it did.
I love that approach. I think with product, it's going to be less clear cut because there's just like little things aren't going as well,
Yeah.
and a good PM or somebody like avoids those things from happening. Like your job is to build this well-oiled machine that
Yeah.
executes well, and it doesn't execute on these little small ways. So it's gonna be a little trickier, I think, to make a list of like, here's the jobs, other than ship awesome stuff that drives your business and make sure everyone's happy. But that's kind of how it all boils down. But I'm excited to see this list that you come up with.
Yeah. Yeah. Some people keep telling me in my conversations, I had another conversation with a PM this morning to try to understand it a little bit better. What is interesting is that his company was acquired and he had no product experience. And they were like, "You're a PM now."
That's
It's like,
exactly the path I went through.
yeah.
Yeah,
He's like, "But I don't know what a PM means. I don't know anything about product." They're like, "Great, you're a PM." And he
yeah,
just sort of figured it out as he went.
yeah. That's
So,
exactly what happens. Yeah, and then you learn,
yeah,
and you spend like 5 years getting pretty good at it.
yeah,
That's yeah, like I said, there's nothing like magical about product. It's just people that have done it for a while have learned things that seem to work. And then they have time. Like
yeah,
engineers don't have time to think about strategy, vision, and research and all these things. So that's a big
yeah,
part of it. So yeah, again, there's nothing magical about it, but it's somebody needs to do these things, whether it's
yeah.
a team or someone else. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess to that point, the like why it feels strange to me is when I talk to PMs about it, most of the time they started out as a PM with no product experience. And also they believe that it's unteachable and that there's lots of intangibles.
Mhm.
And like these things seem at odds to me.
Yeah.
So what are when you were thrust into the role of being a PM, what were what were the things that helped you learn how to be a good PM along the way? Was it having a mentor? Was it just reducing the scope of what it is that you did? How did you manage that?
I'd say it was a combination of just doing it for over and over and over and over and seeing what works and what doesn't. And there's no way to avoid that. And then two, I actually had a really good mentor who taught me a lot about the role, and that was
Mm,
like he was my manager for 3 years, and that was the fastest ramp in my career.
mm,
And I got promoted a bunch, and all these good things happened from that one person. So I think generally those two things are how you get better quickly. And then I have this PM course that you know about that was
yep.
kind of like the goal of the course is to give people that in 3 weeks. But I didn't have that early on.
Yeah. Well, we need a version of that. So we need you to do it in content at some point.
No, we'll see. We'll see where it
Yeah,
goes.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Okay, like if so, we'll take an example that we have upcoming very soon. We have a project. We're looking for who we want to be responsible for it. Let's assume that we're going to pick somebody with limited product experience. What would be the first thing that we should do with that person to make sure that
To
they're successful?
to help them succeed. And again, you're picking someone with limited product experience
Yeah,
in order to learn what problems they have.
yeah.
Trial by fire. Uh, got it. So how to help them succeed? Oh man. Uh, there's like books they should probably read that'll give
Yeah,
them.
which ones?
Okay.
Wanna write it down.
Oh man, on the spot. Um, so there's because what's interesting is you're looking less for like the career of a PM and more like the practical skills of PM.
Mhm,
Okay, so like I let me send you an actual. I'll give you a few right now, but I'll send you a
mhm,
list that's more thought through. Um, Continuous Discovery Habits by Teresa Torres would be really good. It's all about how to do user research really simply and quickly, and then how important that is. It's kind of a new book. Um, what else is there? There's there's a book called Cracking the PM Career by Jackie Bavaro, but it's about the career, which isn't as useful here, but it gives you like an overview of all the elements of product management that you got to
mm,
focus on.
that's
Uh,
helpful.
yeah, there's this guy Marty Kagan wrote two really important books in product management, but they're also like about big company and PM career stuff.
Mm,
So I would not recommend that for this person, but just for your notes, they're called Inspired and Empowered by Marty
think I've
Kagan.
read Inspired.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's like big company stuff. So those are the ones off the top of my head.
Yeah. That's interesting, like, the continuous discovery habits. This maybe ties into where some of the ambiguity is that I would imagine those are very much within the scope of product design from the designers that I've talked to, like user research and problem definitions and those kinds of things. Most of the designers that I know would very much view that in their domain. And maybe there's just overlap there and that's fine.
There's definitely overlap there. It's totally fine. It's awesome when designers are really good at that. Sometimes they're not.
Yep.
It's often a collaboration between design, product, and research if you have a
Yep.
researcher. But yeah, that's definitely within the overlap. And like if you're a PM, if a designer is awesome at this stuff and doing it, that's amazing. Great. Go go do it. I have more time for
Yep.
other stuff.
Yep. Another one that we've been trying to figure out. I fear that I fear what the answer is, which is that I fear that the answer to this question is that every answer is the wrong answer. But we've been trying to figure out
Hmm.
the best way for product and engineering to coordinate. And
Mhm.
it seems like if you bring in engineers early, the project is not sufficiently well defined. If
Mhm.
you bring in engineers too late, then they wish they were brought in earlier to
Totally.
help define it.
Yep.
And it seems like no matter which one we do, if we bring them in early, we brought them in too early. If we bring them in late, we brought them in too late.
Yeah.
And I don't know what your experience has been on when the right time to loop in engineering would be these things.
The way I think about it is give people a chance to contribute at every stage of the process, but not
Mhm.
like make them come to all these meetings that you're having about everything. So there's kind of like these big milestones. You have just like a rough idea, then you have kind of a spec, like a I call it a one pager, just like an overview what the project's going to be, and then there's designs. So what I usually do is just like, hey engineers, here's the roadmap for the whatever next quarter. Let me know if you disagree with anything here prioritization wise. That's just like simplifying it. Then when you have a one page or a PRD of a project, just like send it to the person that's probably going to be working on it and give them a chance to review it and then talk about it in person if you want to. And then as design starts, just kind of keep them up to date. And then once design's over, then you get more serious and meet and talk through everything. So it's kind of
Mm,
this like continued keeping them in the loop and giving them a chance. to participate, but not like, hey, I need you in this meeting we're having about this project from the beginning.
Gotcha. And let's talk about in terms of like engineering, resourcing, and assignment. Um, so I've seen lots of different ways that this is done. I think it would largely just depend on personnel and interests of the team. Um, but some teams have multiple weeks, on the order of 10 weeks of the product and design team without really any engineering participation. They define the problem, do the user research, they scope it, they define it, and then they bring in engineering and then they say like, hey, how practical is this? Like, help us scope this even further.
Yeah.
Um, and that seems fine. And also I've seen other projects or companies where their process, like every engineer is on the product from day one. Like they're
Right.
part of the process from the
Right.
very, very beginning.
Right.
So
Yeah. That
um,
sucks.
yeah.
The way I'd approach that is uh, try to predict who's going to work on it. Just like every project
Mm,
should have an engineer that you think is probably going to take it. And
yeah.
and if that ends up being generally right, then you're awesome. If not, then you just pick like a representative of engineering that's involved that
Sure.
the rest of the team trusts, and they're like, cool, they've got
Yep.
a say throughout, and so it's all good. Sometimes that's like the head of engineering or somebody like a senior manager,
Right.
but so it doesn't have to be like exactly right every time that the same person that's going to build it is involved, but they need to feel
Right.
like engineering was represented from the beginning a lot of times. And so I would just pick someone and just like they're nominated to be the person for that project.
Yeah. The senior engineer or like eng manager makes a lot of sense because one of the things that we've tried a few different patterns for this. And one of the things that just pieces of feedback that I've gotten from our engineering team, which is about 15 people now, is that it's really frustrating when you're an engineer assigned to build something, but you're also a stakeholder in this other project and you're supposed to advise them. And the context switching between projects can
Mhm.
be really a lot more costly than I think most people realize. And so
Got it.
we're trying to figure out what how much context switching is reasonable for engineers. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so like if let's say we'll pick a hypothetical. Let's say you expect the scoping phase of project X to be 4 weeks and you put an engineer on that as a stakeholder. Do you also give them other projects to fill up their time or do you just like what do you do in that
Yeah.
situation?
And when you're saying scoping, meaning like design or
Yeah.
yeah, you definitely there's yeah, you definitely that's not a full-time job for an engineer, so absolutely. Um, but they're not like I don't think an engineer needs to be that deeply involved in that period. I think
Yep.
it's like the designer goes off and designs some new mocks and shares it with the engineer, and then they have like a meeting for half an hour, maybe once a week.
Right.
So it doesn't take that much time. But if you're finding that's a problem, yeah, I think the senior engineer nomination also works great. Like as
Yep.
long as someone is there catching things, that's the most important part.
Yep. In the designing and scoping phase, what would you say are the most important things to solve for in that phase?
From an engineering perspective or in general?
From a product perspective,
Oh, okay.
like before it
The
gets handed off to engineering.
So high level, the most important thing is that you're solving the problem that you set out to solve, which sounds obvious, but it's oftentimes what goes wrong at that point.
Yep.
Um, and so, just like a pro tip, there is anytime a designer is sharing designs, always start with "Here's the problem we're solving." Just remind them,
Mhm.
"Here's the problem we're solving." So that's the most important thing. Um, the other is, I guess, just off the top of my head, um, making sure it's like within the scope of what you're trying to do. You know, there's like a million things you can build, and is this
Right.
like is this the size of project that you were hoping it'd be? And then
Right.
are you making the kind of trade offs you should be doing? You should be making. Um, those are the I guess if you're asking the most important things, those seem
Yep.
to be the most important things. Is there anything else you're thinking there that like you run into?
Um. No, I'm thinking about some of the projects that have gone well, and some of the projects that have gone less well.
Uh huh.
And like a lot of the ones that have gone less well seem to suffer from scope creep.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I'm not sure how much of that could have been solved by better initial setup.
Yeah,
Um, I wrote,
absolutely.
yeah, I wrote a memo recently thinking about we, why it is useful to spend more time than some people think is reasonable writing out thoughts in long form before assigning engineering to it. Because engineers are, for most software companies, the primary constraint. And if your decision is going to cascade into 25 weeks of eng time, that's actually pretty consequential. And if you spending an extra 5 days thinking about it would have mitigated even 1 week of eng time, it would probably be worth it. So yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like a problem you guys are having is like designs end up being a lot more complicated to build than people think.
I mean, different projects have had different failure modes.
Got it.
Like the some of them, some of the issues are there's a problem, and then the problem is reasonable, but then the solution proposed solves it in like it's like solving it for a very distant future state
Mhm.
that
Yep. Yep.
we could just solve it in a day,
Yep.
or we could build this like really intense way of solving it for all possible future states.
Yeah.
And so finding that trade off, I guess, is maybe part of it.
Never had that experience. So this is a stuff that PMs help with is
Yeah,
they stay on top of that kind of stuff and make sure the engineer takes the time to review all the stuff, often sees the things that are going to take a month versus a day.
yeah,
So these are the kinds of skills that you need for that person to have. That's kind of in between because designers are you really want them to think big and think creatively and push the envelope and that kind of thing. So it's help. You need somebody that's not necessarily the engineer that's like always going to be how do we make this less
yeah,
complicated to be kind of this middle moderator. And so those are the kinds of things this DRI/PM should do for you. And
yeah,
but it still happens. Things still fall through the cracks until you start building. You never really know what's going on.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
It-
an
yeah.
interesting case study is a lot of times it's actually been our engineers who have been the best at helping to reduce scope.
Mhm. Yeah.
Where we had one particular project that was originally, when it came from product and design, it was scoped for 4 eng weeks, which is reasonable. And the engineer said, "Hey, if we do it this other way, it's only going to take 1 week." That was
Mhm.
great.
Yeah.
And so we simplified the implementation and got it shipped a lot faster.
Great.
Um, so I would imagine if the engineer was involved even earlier in the process, it would have saved more time.
Yeah.
But then again, I guess you do the trade off of what is the
Context switching.
constraint?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's always going to happen. You're never going to not have those problems and
Right.
opportunities. But yeah, I do, like when you think the engineer being involved, like if they spend half an hour on this a week, do you feel like that's too much context switching?
I don't, I guess I would have to try to measure or ask them how much time they were contributing previously. I think they were probably spending a lot more than that, would be
Oh,
my
wow.
guess.
And they still didn't catch that kind of opportunity until they saw it
Yeah. I
at the
think
end.
it's probably more like it's more like a 10 minutes a day, every day.
I
That is the
see.
context switching.
I
So you
see.
don't really get deep enough to understand what it is.
Got it.
Um, just basically catching up on things and just being in the information fire hose.
I
So
see.
that's my guess.
Huh. That feels like not a problem of just like spending 10 minutes a day checking on another project that's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
That shouldn't distract engineers, in my opinion, too much.
Yeah.
Like they're not sitting there all day, 8 hours straight coding.
Right.
And and I imagine it's like fun to think about something else for a little bit, but maybe not.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's really helpful in thinking about this. Um,
Cool.
yeah. I guess the last question I would have is around this the one piece of product that seems the least tractable to me in terms of how you would define it or go about teaching it is this product intuition concept.
Yep.
Um, is that something that you touch on in your training course?
I don't. This is what I would if I had another week in the course, I would touch on it. I don't actually know the answer.
Mm.
I actually have a guest post coming all about this topic of
Oh,
like
good.
things you can do to build your product sense and product
Yeah.
intuition. And most of it just comes down to uh, like doing this for a while, watching customers use your product in many products, and just like becoming aware of where they have problems, where they enjoy it, what goes well, what doesn't go well, and then just running a bunch of experiments, and then like constantly being surprised about the thing that works and doesn't work. So, so it's not something you just sit down like 3 weeks later and got this figured out.
Right.
It's a long, yeah, it's a tough one to build. So, but that'd be
Cool.
cool. That'd be a great idea for a course. Just like
Yeah.
matrix style product sense jacket.
Yeah. So we'll pay for it if you do it. So
Okay.
it
All right.
just has to be in content. We don't do a lot of things live.
Got it. All right. Good tip. Good tip.
All right. Well, that's all I had in terms of questions.
Sweet. Maybe a thought to leave you with is uh, when, like a point at which it feels like you probably need a PM or someone that has done PM for a while is, is when you're just noticing a bunch of misalignment or a
Yeah.
bunch of bottlenecks. If it just continues to happen, or PM's also good for just like take this thing and go run with it like a mini Sam
Yeah.
and help launch this thing. Those are kind of like three signs that you probably want someone that's like been a PM for a while.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because we have one of those situations right now, and it's I was talking to Scott, who's our head of product, who
Mm,
also is an experienced product person, and um, like the answer that we all came to was like, yeah, if we had an experienced PM on this, it would probably be solved. But
mm,
it's
interesting.
also like, yeah, but you could also say that about every engineering project you've ever had. It's like, well, if only we had our most senior engineer working on every problem, then things would be great. Like, yeah, well, of course it would.
Yeah, but I think it's clear like the PM skill set would be good there, right? So I think that's
Yeah.
just like coming back to your like, why do you need PMs? There's like this set of skills that's very useful in specific situations, and that's one.